Welcome everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Webinar number 10. We have some special guests tonight, but I'm not going to tell you about them yet.
Cool.
So let's see, is the chat working? I know you're going to ask, I know you think I'm going to ask you, what have you had for your tea? But I'm not. You can tell me if you like, won't be offended. But because it's so warm in some parts of the country, what is your favourite cold drink? So at the moment, I've got a nice cold glass of water, which I'm going to do my best not to drink all in 10 minutes, otherwise I'll have to disappear. But what's your favourite cold drink? So panellists and guests, if you can kick things off by what is your favourite cold drink in the chat, and then we can also see, is the chat working? Louise, pizza and lager.
Oh, ice cream soda.
Ice cream soda. I haven't had that for years.
I don't think I've ever had it.
Excellent for everybody just coming in, 142 of you. What's your favourite cold drink? I'm not going to make the mistake of saying it's really sunny, because I appreciate that not everybody lives where I live. Like, you know, I did make that mistake a few weeks ago. But if it is sunny, or if you have had some sunny weather, what drink has been keeping you going? Orange juice and vanilla ice cream. That's not in the same glass, is it, Sylvia? I mean, if it is, no judgment.
Pink gin, nice.
Different. Campari and soda, blood orange gin. I noticed it's gone to alcohol quite quickly, hasn't it? Like,
you may have had a different view. We've got lots of guests with us tonight, and I am really excited about tonight's webinar. But before we look at tonight's specific content, then I just want to introduce everybody to, we have a new Student Connect team member, Diana. If you've been attending every webinar, then you will remember Diana, because she took the student spotlight in the anti-racist practice webinar. But Diana has now joined our team full-time, so I'm just going to let Diana introduce herself to you. Are you there, Diana?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi everyone. So I'm Diana Katoto. I'm a university student at the University of Birmingham. So my role is basically controlling the Twitter. So I want you guys to connect with me, use the hashtags, and I'll be replying and retweeting, and just engage with me. Tell me what your thoughts are, how you feel about the webinar.
Thanks very much, Diana, and it's great to have you on board with us on the Student Connect team. So thanks very much, and welcome to your first live webinar as a member of the team. And you know everybody else on the team if you've been coming to webinars, so you'll recognise everybody else. But we have lots of guests with us tonight. They are going to introduce themselves when they talk, rather than at the beginning. Just following on quickly from last week's webinar, then Professor Mark Dole has sent us a message to say thanks to everybody who sent him emails about the objects that they chose. And if you've not taken a look, then please do take a look at the website on the 40 objects, because there is a whole page dedicated to last week's webinar on there. So if you were here at last week's webinar, or if you weren't here and you just want to take a look at it, then it's on the website, which we sent the information about in our follow-up email after last week's session. So tonight, believe it or not, is our 10th Wednesday webinar, and it's time from our perspective for us to celebrate. I don't think we ever thought that this was going to happen when we got together, that we were going to have had 10 really successful webinars, but we're going to be celebrating that 10th webinar tonight. And we'll also be celebrating the creativity of social workers. So the topic for tonight's webinar is sharing reflection, self-developed models of reflection, and that's what we're going to be looking at together tonight. I'm currently in Belfast. I think I said this to you last week. I'm visiting my daughter, and this is a photograph that I took. It's of the Peace Walls in Belfast. One of the Peace Walls has lots of murals painted by young people saying what they want to be, and this one says, do you know what I'd like to be? A social worker, definitely. And if you took me back to my childhood, I would still want to be a social worker. So I've been a social worker for 30 years and am immensely proud to be a social worker, but never more so since the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and I started to work with the students in the Connect team. And because we are all proud of social work, we want to use this 10th webinar to celebrate social work creativity. There's a quote here from Clark in 1995, which I think is a really perfect way of summarising why we need to be creative as social workers. The quote goes, "The problems faced by social workers are sufficiently unfamiliar and complex and subtle to require the application of creativity and imagination to resolve them." And we do need to be creative as social workers. But now more than ever, because of the situation that we're working in at the moment, we need to be creative. We need to have creative management. We need to work in creative teams. We need organisations to be creative and to enable our creativity. And I've been filled, I've told you a few times now in the Wednesday webinars, that I've been filled with hope for the future of social work by working through these webinars and by looking at the really creative responses that we've had through social media to our webinars. And we're going to be partly looking at that whole celebration and some of the feedback that we've had from our weekly webinars. The Big Six is a model of reflection that I developed many years ago now. I started to talk about this in training. I was emailed actually recently to say, when did you develop this model? And I was trying to work it out. I think it was around about 2002 that I worked through and developed the model. But I think the reference is for 2016 is the first time I actually published it and wrote about it. But the Big Six has been a really popular model recently. I'm not going to go through the Big Six because many of you know it. You can look at the YouTube video, which I know lots of people have been watching, about the Big Six. But the Big Six is a model of reflection, a component model of reflection, which I developed some time ago. We've had loads of emails in recently saying, oh, I'm going to use the Big Six for my critical reflection, or I want to use the Big Six. Can you give me an answer about this? And so I thought we'd maybe think about tonight as being the Big 10. We're going to talk about 10 different models of reflection. The Big Six is the first of those models, but through tonight you are going to learn about 10 different models of reflection. And we're going to be sharing that reflection. So the first model that I'm going to talk about is the share model of reflection. Now, I was involved in developing this with Joe Finch and Prospera Teddem, who has been a guest on the webinars. And share can be used in a wide range of ways in social work, but myself, I see it predominantly as a model of reflection and analysis. It's a model that Joe and Prospera and I developed to try and bridge what we saw as a potentially growing gap between social work practice and social work education. It provides a multisensory approach within social work and has, as I said, a very wide application. It's a component model based around 5 separate but interconnecting components. So the idea of this model of reflection is for you to think about, in any situation, your share. Your share might be quite different to somebody else's share. So 2 social workers can go out to see the same family and come away with a completely different view of what's going on. And that could be because they have a different share. Maybe one of them has seen something that another one hasn't seen. Maybe one of them has read something that the other one hasn't read. But your share, the word spells out seeing, hearing, action, reading, and evaluation. And everything you do should be a share. I love to use share to think about my CPD. So I'm regulated by Social Work England, and to think through what am I going to write about in my CPD, 1 month I would choose something I've seen. So I might think about, I've watched a television program and I learned a lot from that, and I'll write about that. The next month, something that I've heard, maybe a radio program that I've listened to, or maybe some feedback that I've had from somebody, and I'll write about that. The next month, something that I've done. The next month, something that I've read, and then I evaluate how is my CPD going. So you can use share in so many different ways to help you to structure and analyse any situation. So that helps me to structure my CPD. There is a book about share, and it's quite an extensive book. There's chapters on each component, for example, but it's it's a big model. It can do a lot of different things. But when talking to the team, the Connect team, about how we could put these models into place tonight, we decided just to start with share, partly because we wanted to use the word share, because tonight social workers and students and team managers have come along to join us to share the models that they've developed, but also partly because we wanted to think about what share means for us. So Omar, I notice, has put a poll up at the moment. Have you heard of the share model? To see how many people are aware of it. And at the moment I can see it's around about half and half. So just over half, 58% of people who are answering have heard of the model, and 40 something percent is moving all of the time. 43% haven't heard of the model. Of course, we've already looked at in webinar 2, we already did some analysis with the people attending through polls there about what's the most popular model that's being taught on social work training. And we discovered from that the most popular model is Gibbs. Now, if you read about Gibbs' model, Gibbs says he took 20 years to develop his model of reflection, and he developed it working along with lots of colleagues. The people who are going to share their models tonight, some of them developed them in 20 minutes, half an hour, and they're better and have more relevance for social work than Gibbs. And so we're really proud to be sharing some of that creativity with you this evening. The share model is a component model, and we're going to look at what that means in terms of the difference between a process and a component model. It's very based around social work values. It's informed by lots of different stakeholders. Lots of people contributed to the development of the model and the book about the model. It's informed by theory and it's informed by research. It has wide application. It's very contemporary, and I know a lot of people are using share to think about how we plan and structure the work that we do during the pandemic. If we can't see people face to face, how do we draw on other parts of share? How do we draw more effectively on what we hear and what we read and so on? So it's very contemporary, and it's reflexive with an E, with an X, reflexivity. Now, if you've been following weekly webinars, you'll know in webinar 2, we talked about what's the difference between reflection and reflexivity. And reflexivity is very much about self-awareness. It's very much more about contextual practice. It's much more about connectivity and relationships. It's much more about what social work is, reflexivity. And we're going to return to that reflexivity component in a moment. But why the word share? I want to ask you what the word share means to you. And I'm going to ask you just to put that down in the chat. Write down in the chat box, what does the word share mean to you? Forget the model. You've never heard of the model. If you just heard that word share, what does it mean to you? When Joe and Prosper and I first started to develop the model, I think we actually started off with something like shed, so which doesn't have any meaning in social work, and we wanted to make sure that the word that we used had meaning for us as social workers, and the word share does. So over the time that we were developing the model, over the couple of years, we asked people, what does the word share mean to you? And I'm going to tell you now what people say the word share means to them. And I'm hoping that you've already started to type in the chat box what the word means to you. And then let's look at whether there's any diversity there in terms of what the word means to us. So in terms of starting off, what the word share means is it originally comes from the Old English word shear. And shear, if you think about it, is what we chop up the garden, don't we? Shearing. You use a pair of shears to like cut down a fence, a privet hedge or something in the garden. Shear is about chopping things up. And that's where the word comes from. It's all about, originally the word share meant chopping up and dividing up resources. That's what it meant. Now, for us as social workers, we're thinking about how resources are shared all of the time. The word share can also relate to giving and receiving something. So sharing a gift with someone, or the giving and receiving of something. Share, to some people, is about what we have in common with each other. So what characteristics do we share? So for example, all of our guests tonight that are going to share models with us are all women. And I'm really proud of that, because many of the models that are portrayed and taught to us on social work training, as we've already talked about, come from a very white male background. And we're challenging that in our webinar tonight to share new ideas about reflection for social work. So we all have in common, in terms of the models that are being shared tonight, what we have in common is our gender. So you can think about share being, what do we share? Having things in common. Now, when we ask young people, this is really interesting to me, probably because, you know, I'm 52 years old, but when we ask young people, what does the word share mean to you? Lots of them talked about the digital share, sharing things on social media, sharing things online. I would have never have thought of that in relation to the word share, but it is all about the digital share for some people. Share often relates to well-being. It can give a sense of well-being when you share with others. Sharing is seen as a virtue, isn't it? When you've got children, you really want children to learn to share. It's one of the first things that we try to teach our children as parents. So sharing is often linked into kindness. Sharing can also, the word share also can be about a sense of belonging. A lot of people that we asked and we consulted with who were care experienced, and we said, what does the word share mean to you? A lot of care experienced people talked to us about a sense of belonging. So all of these things are important for us and all relate to the word share and what it means for us. In social work, a lot of people think about information sharing and knowledge sharing when we talk about share. But something that I'm thinking, I don't know what's been put in the chat at all, and all of you can see the chat, but I can't, I can only see my screen. But when we asked certain groups of people, and it was actually people who were doing business studies training, we asked a group of business studies people, what does the word share mean to you? And they didn't come up with, hardly any of them came up with the words that we've got on there so far. They came up with a word, an association that I assume we haven't got in the chat, but it was all about stocks and shares. The word share to some people is about their liquidity and their wealth and their shares. What shares do they own? And so when we drew all of this together, what does this word mean? It shows us that what something means to one person, it can mean something completely different to somebody else. So that word share can mean different things to different people. From my perspective now, share is all about the model. It's all about what can you see, what can you hear, what can you do in a situation. But just to draw through from that stocks and shares, it's important for us as social workers. If you think about the previous slide, if I go back to that previous slide, the top is about the division of resources and the bottom is about stocks and shares. And on this slide, what I'm going to say is that top, that division of resources, that sharing up of resources, we don't all get an equal share of the cake, do we? These, the figures on here, the research on here is all taken from the book, but it could be much more recent if we think about persistent poverty. You know, a huge amount of people in our country are living in persistent poverty, and that's being exaggerated by the pandemic. In 2017, 30% of Britain's children were classified as poor. That's a horrendous figure for a nation like ours. And we know that poverty links into other forms of oppression. We are going to do a poverty-informed webinar because we think poverty is so important in terms of social work and recognising poverty and how we respond to poverty as social workers. But then let's think about that stocks and shares. I believe very strongly that we should be working with people as social workers, and social work should not be about stocks and shares, and yet there is a huge amount of privatisation going on within social work, and there's some figures there. I won't read them all out to you, but we know, for example, that large companies are selling their care businesses for huge amounts of profit. We don't all get an equal share of the cake, and stocks and shares should not be something that is brought into social work. And for me, that's a key part of the share model. So share, is a model of reflection. But tonight we are going to be sharing models of reflection, because to me, sharing is all about reciprocity. And many people, as I said to you, contributed to the book about the share model. And tonight we're going to share the panel with people who've been to our previous webinars, or some people who've done training with me face to face when I was still able to do that. And we're going to share with you models that have been created. This is a photograph taken from some training not long before we went into lockdown. And as people who are here will know, I've been very critical of the models that are traditionally taught on social work programs, particularly in the UK, as coming mostly from other professions, often health, and as being Eurocentric. And so I have encouraged people to develop their own models of reflection. It's been a key part of my work over the last 10 years or so. And so some of those models are the ones that we're going to share tonight. But just to very quickly revisit some of the theory behind this, if we revisit the stages of reflection, remember Shern talked about reflection in action and reflection on action. You see, I use share a lot to reflect in action, and I struggle with that more now. In a webinar, I can't see the audience. I can't see whether you're engaged with what we're saying. If I was in a room with people, I'd be able to see, are people listening? Are people taking notes? Oh, that must be an important point. I'll stay with it for a moment because they're note taking. I've lost a lot of my share in terms of my reflecting in action in the moment. Reflecting on action is what we do later, looking back at an event. And then Killian and Tottenham added a third stage of reflection where they talked about reflection for action, the importance of reflecting before a piece of work. So what we should have in reflection is before, during, and after. And in all of our webinars, we've tried to encourage all three of those stages. So sometimes we've asked you to do something in preparation for a webinar, and sometimes we encourage you to do things after a webinar to aid you in your learning and development. So that whole aspect of plan, do, and review is important when we come to think about what constitutes a process model of reflection and what constitutes a component model of reflection. Most of the models that are taught on social work training are process models. They're linear. They provide a process to work through. Step 1, step 2, step 3. The problem with that is it doesn't recognize the complexity of the work that we're involved in. Linear processes don't really work when there's so much complexity going on. Component models are models which simply say, think about these issues, and you can think about them in any order and you can revisit them and you can move around. That generally helps more for complexity. But it does mean component models can leave people feeling less confident about using them because, well, what do I do next? Is almost, well, what do you want to do next with this? Where do you think it should go? So a process model is one which is linear and takes you through a particular way, but it's also a model which can largely only be used to reflect on action after something has happened. So it's a model which waits for something to happen and then you can use the model to reflect back. A component model can be used at any stage of reflection. So that's a little bit just revisiting the theory that we did in webinar 2, but it's just helping us to revisit it. So in terms of self-created models, there are lots of benefits to developing your own model, even if that's just about you own it. It's meaningful for you. You have that model, it's yours. And I've noticed that Omar has now put a poll up. I know not everyone is able to access the poll, but he's put a poll up asking you, have you created your own model of reflection? And I'm hoping that if you haven't created your own model of reflection, that you will do so after tonight, that you will be inspired by the speakers that we are about to hear. I know they're all getting themselves ready now. We're about to hear from speakers who have developed their own model of reflection. And when you have your own model of reflection, it means more to you. It structures your reflection. It helps your reflection. I normally do this, as this photograph shows, as a group work activity during face-to-face training. So for me, of course, that's been quite challenging now because I'm working online and it's more difficult to say, let's develop our own model of reflection. But it can still be done to develop your own model. And some of the models you're going to see tonight, many of the models you're going to see tonight have been developed during lockdown and take lockdown into account. But look, I'm looking up here on the poll, we've got 40% of people haven't developed their own model, but 39% of people want to develop their own model, but only 9% have said they will develop their own model. So if you want to, the only way to turn that into doing it is to do it. So really try to, after tonight, think about, okay, I'm going to go off and do it. You have the power to develop your own model. In preparation for tonight, I took a look at the photos. I always take photographs of the models when they're developed during training. And I took a look over the last 2 years, because that's how long I've had my phone. So that's the gallery that I had on my phone. And there were more than 140 models on my phone that have been developed, and they're brilliant. And I'm going to start off by sharing one of them. Social workers tend to, more often, they develop component or combination models. And the first model that I'm going to share with you is, my screen doesn't seem to be moving on. Okay, the most common model ideas that I saw on my phone of those 140 were travel, growth, fairground rides, activities, so something like football or so on, animals, and either a mnemonic like share, so a word that spells something out or stands for something, or letters. And the models that you see tonight represent lots of those. But they don't always, not every model is either travel or growth or fairground. You can do whatever you want to with a model. So I'm just going to share with you, this is a photograph that's on my camera. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get hold of any of the people who did this, but I always ask people, put your name on the model so that it's yours. And the names are there. Look, Hannah Wilcock, Jamie Haig, Jen Ridley and Sarah Johnson. I can't remember where they were from, but they developed this model of reflection, and it's a fabulous model. I'd been talking to them about reflexivity, and then off they go for 10 minutes in a group to develop a model. And they thought, one of them said, you know, when she was talking about reflexivity, I often say X marks the spot. So you can see the red X on the word there. That's what I often say during training. And this person in the group said, I thought she said eggs marks the spot. And so then they decided to go with eggs to develop a model of reflection. And it's brilliant, isn't it? Achieving excellent reflection. And they've got to think about all the things you need to think about can be represented by eggs. If you go dairy free, you need to think about ethical considerations in anything in social work. The fried egg represents the fact that we need to think about what went well. The sunny side up egg, what went well? When are you cooking with gas? The egg white represents that sometimes we need to think about what's missing, what don't we know in this situation. The poached egg represents, did you get the right balance? Did you get that balance of self-care and power? Did you manage to do it well? The omelette is, what ingredients and resources did you use or will you use to get the best outcome? The hard-boiled egg, how do you keep a strong shell as a social worker? How do you maintain your emotional resilience? The soft-boiled egg comes with the soldiers, and who are your soldiers? What can they do to help? And finally, the scrambled egg, what confused us? What was messy? I think that's a brilliant model developed in 20 minutes around helping us to think about what do we need to consider when we are reflecting on something in social work. And each of these models that has been developed to do different things. So this would be a really good model to consider our role as a social worker in a situation. Some models are good to look at a particular situation. Some models are good to look at a period of time. So that was to start us off with shared models. Now, on when I was going through my phone, the next model that came up, I was able to get hold of one of the people who developed this model. So we have with us Gemma England, who is going to tell you, I'm hoping now, if Gemma's on camera, Gemma is going to talk you through this model that she developed as part of face-to-face training that I did with her in Wales. Are you there, Gemma?
I hope so, yeah. Can you see me?
I can hear you, which is fabulous. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, my name's Gemma England and I'm a social worker with Adult Services in South Wales, and I've been qualified for 8 years. The model you can see now was developed on training with Siobhan. It was a group effort. I think it was the afternoon after we'd had the morning session. So you see the names there of all the people that were involved as well. But just to talk you through it, we sort of played on the pause for thought in terms of reflection, and that we're paused to reflect on things. And then we looked at the different elements of the cat. So we looked at the eyes, and again a play on the cat's eyes on the road actually do reflect things. So we quite like that. But it was about what we see, how we see the situation, so how other people see us, so the other people that are in that situation, they are seeing you know, what we're presenting to them, as well as what we can see from them and from the situation. In terms of reflecting as well, we were looking at the positives, so you know, it's important to sort of reflect on positive aspects of the interaction, and also any development areas that we might look at. Then with the ear as well, so it's talking about all of our senses and tapping into the model that Siobhan has just explained. So about what we can hear. So in that environment, we're having that interaction, what we can hear from other people, from the people who were there, but also from perhaps other professionals or family members, carers, taking everything into consideration. And then the whiskers, we equated the whisker to feelings. So in the way that cats sort of use their whiskers to navigate where they're going in the world. We were saying about how important it is to acknowledge our feelings, and that we are human, we're going to have feelings about the situation, and that they might impact on how we interpret that situation. So as long as we're acknowledging that, but also the importance of acknowledging and trying to think of how the other people in that interaction are going to be feeling as well. Not to second guess, to take it into consideration. Next then, with the collar cat, we sort of saw that in two different lights. So it was representing the organisational sort of aspect of our work, and that you could see a collar almost as a constraint. So perhaps the policy or legislation, or even our organisation, the culture of that might constrict how we can work and the things we're able to do. But on the other hand of that, if a cat's wearing a collar, that perhaps means it belongs to somebody and is being looked after. So we looked at it in terms of support as well, so that same legislative framework that we're working to can provide us with sort of almost a backup and a framework to work within, and that can be reassuring and feel that we are supported. And then the little ID tag on the cat's collar was a literal sort of translation into our identity as social workers. So our social work values that underpin all of our practice, and our personal and professional identities, and how sometimes they can be different or be conflicting almost. We were looking then at how we use reflection as a tool to develop our self-awareness through reflecting. That's how we then become more aware of our identity, of our values, of our feelings, and how our lived experiences will impact upon interactions and how we interpret those as well. We did touch upon as well how we are perceived by others. So when we're walking into a situation, how we are presenting ourselves is going to impact on how that is received by the people that we're working with. And then the little mouse down in the corner, because we've been very kindly reminded by Siobhan earlier in the course about how, in order for reflection to be critical, we need to look at the power balance. And so literally, again, cat and mouse situation, where sometimes we're going to feel like we have some power, so the cat, and other times we're going to feel powerless and that we're the mouse, and that can change, all the time. But about the importance of, even if a lot of times as a social worker I don't feel powerful, but it's important to acknowledge that there is a power differential, and the people that we are working with and the people's homes we're going into and lives that we're affecting are going to see us as having power, So unless we acknowledge that, and if we don't feel it, we have to acknowledge it so that we don't abuse it unintentionally. So that was the significance of the mouse. And then just the last little bit was the cat with 9 lives. So we were drawing upon the fact that when you boil it right back down to what are the basics of reflection, it's about learning from our experiences. So about sort of making each life count, so making each interaction count, so you know where you're going with that, but also learning from your past life, the past experiences. So that was it. So that's the pause for thought.
That's great. Thanks, Gemma. I think you presented that really well as well. And I mean, I just have always loved this as a model because I think it has so much in there around, you know, that self-awareness, which makes it reflexivity, the power dynamic. I love that whole element of cat and mouse. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I think people can see, oh, Kelly's telling me that in the chat it says that's a perfect model. So really, really good bit of chat there. So thanks ever so much for sharing that, Gemma, and for being the first of our guests to speak tonight. So we're going to go now to, that was Gemma was involved in training with me some time ago when we were doing this face-to-face, but we're going to now hear from Valerie. I'm hoping that Valerie is there, and Valerie's going to tell us, this is a model which she's developed, I think, since doing it on your own, Gemma. Sorry.
Yes, it was after the webinar.
Thank you. You did it on your own after a webinar, didn't you, Valerie? So do you want to tell people about your model of reflection, which you emailed us and we thought was fabulous? So thank you. It's your turn.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm Valerie Robins, and I am a second year of social work student of Anglia Ruskin University, Peterborough campus, and I am now on the last few weeks of my first placement. While being at my placement, I've struggled with writing crops, and who doesn't know what crops are? They are critical reflections of practice, which we have to write for our portfolios. So exactly at that point, Siobhan and the team organized a webinar on models of reflection, and this webinar inspired me to make my own model. The idea for swimming in the sea model came literally while I was swimming in the sea, and I saw lots of parallels between the swimming event and events or meetings that I was part of during my placement. So, for example, I facilitated a session for mums and babies, and I wanted to write a crop about it. So the model has 4 stages. The first one is preparation and packing stage. Next one is testing the water, then swimming stage, and after swim. So the first stage, when you're preparing to go for a swim, you will be thinking of when you will be swimming, where, what level of swimming experience you will need for this particular sea, and what adverse conditions you might need to be aware of, like big waves or strong current. You need to think about what you will pack with you, what equipment. So in preparation for that session with mums, I had to choose the date that was convenient for everyone. I had to research a history of the families who will be taking part, think of what I will be doing during the session, what theories I will be using. And the session was happening during the lockdown, and the COVID-19 was actually that adverse factor that I had to deal with. So I saw COVID-19 as a kind of a storm in the sea. I had to learn to deal with it, learn how to use Zoom, Skype, and other programs, make sure that the participants are happy to join the session via technology. And I had to learn how to interact through digital media and overcome those big waves. The next stage is testing the water. And when you arrive at the beach, you might decide that the water is too cold and you might want to put a wetsuit on. So you adjust your plans according to the sea conditions. The same was happening to me during that session. For example, a couple of mums couldn't join in. And one of the mums asked me to discuss a topic, actually that wasn't part of my plan. And before the session began, I already had to adjust my plans. And then there is actual swim. And you might be during a stage enjoying yourself, feeling confident, properly equipped, or you might be struggling. You might be pushing yourselves, building your muscles, learning all the way. I was putting parallels between the swimming and that support group session. And I was thinking, is the current too strong? Meaning that, is the environment actually too resistant for me? Do I feel out of my depth? Meaning, am I actually qualified enough or experienced enough to be facilitating this group? And are there any areas that I don't have enough knowledge of? And then there is the last stage, the after swim stage. You come out of the sea and you're thrilled, you're delighted with your swim, like I was after that session. Or you actually might be tired or even exhausted. You are reflecting on how it went, what you learned from it. And then you start thinking, did I learn new techniques? Did I build muscles? And then I'm ready now for even a bigger swim. You might decide that you actually need a supervision session after a difficult meeting, or do research about a particular topic that came across during the session. And then the cycle starts again with the next event. So using this model made writing my crop an absolute pleasure. I actually had a very good feedback from my practice educator, and I'm not scared of reflections anymore. So thank you.
That's wonderful. I absolutely love that, Valerie. I think when you sent me the model originally, when you developed it, the thing that I love about it is that testing the water stage, because it adds into those 3 stages of reflection. You're thinking about things before you go in the sea, and then the swimming is reflecting in action, and the after is reflecting on action. But that addition of testing the water, I think is just brilliant. I think, what you've come up with here is really, really good model of reflection. And I also love the fact that you came up with it whilst you were swimming in the sea, because I think it also talks about spaces of reflection, which we've talked about in these webinars as well, haven't we? And where do we reflect? So I think this is a fabulous model, but what's really nice to hear is that it helped you develop your critical reflection of practice, and that you got really good feedback on it. I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about writing a critical reflection of practice being an absolute pleasure. So that's marvelous, isn't it? That's a great outcome. And thank you so much for sharing that. And just think about, all the evidence that will provide you now for your placement as well, that you've developed your own model. All those students that are listening to you thinking about, could I develop a model? It's so useful what you've just shared with them. So thank you very much for that. And we're going to go now on to Shabnam, who is going to share with us a model that she's developed. Are you there, Shabnam?
I am indeed, Siobhan. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Brilliant.
Would you like to tell us about your model?
Absolutely. Thank you, Siobhan, and to your brilliant Student Connect team. It's a real honour to be here. I said in the chat last week that when I listen to you speak, and all the guests and all the chats, I just feel like I've come home, and I absolutely do. So it's a real honour to be here. I'm Shabnam Ahmed. I'm a social worker, a practice educator, a team manager, a trainer, and also a student, like many of you here. I'm doing my doctorate in social work. And today, the model that I want to share with you, it's through all those lenses, really. So I hope that you will find the model useful, because I think it can have a wide application. Now, because I've only got 5 minutes, Siobhan, it's probably best to go to slide 3 and show my model. It's going to be very difficult. That's it, yeah. So my model is about supervision, an area I'm extremely passionate about. And it's called the 6 R's of supervision. The idea behind this model is really to reiterate the importance of the supervisory relationship, and that both the supervisor and the supervisee play an active role in supervision. And for me, it encompasses elements of a preparation, like a preparatory reflection. So reflection for action, but also reflecting in and on action, as Siobhan mentioned, the Sean model. The preparatory element for me is quite important, as I think no model will work as effectively or to its full potential without there being a relationship between the supervisor and supervisee. And so if you look at my model, it's a cube. You could call it a block, so you're laying the foundation. A block or a cube has 6 faces, so the model has 6 faces, and hence the 6 R's. I've split them 3 under the supervisor and the supervisee, but they're all interconnected and in actual fact crossover. Now, if you notice the lines between the supervisor and the supervisee, the red lines going across, that is highlighting the relationship. Now, I've deliberately kept those lines messy and imperfect, because no relationship is perfect, right? We're going to have the swings, we're going to have the roundabouts, and it's a journey. But that's where we learn and we grow. So that's why I've kept it like that. Now, in terms of this model, so say if you're a practice, just to give you an example, I think it has multiple uses, and I'm not going to have the time to go into them here. But if I use the example of a practice educator on their first supervision with their student, or a new or a team manager having someone newly come into the team, it's a model that you can take in with you, and it's thinking about your thinking for supervision. So in social work, we call that reflecting for action, right? So the R there under the supervisor is regular. So how regular is supervision going to be? We all have mandates and policies, and maybe for students it's once a week, for staff it's once every 4 weeks. But you know, this COVID situation has taught us so much. We're not in the same office anymore. Some people need more support, different kind of support. So I'm kind of pushing you to really think about that activism and how you might change policies and think about what's person-centered in supervision. And particularly with the Black Lives Matters movement, if you think about the words that have come into our vocabulary, you know, the microaggressions and micro-incivilities, what message do you give when you postpone supervision? So really to think about what regular means and to have that open discussion with your student or the person you're supervising. The second R for me is relational, which I think, you know, all the R's are important, but without a relationship, as I said, you can go in with any model, Gibbs, Kolb. You know, if the relationship's not there, I'm not sure that the model's going to work to its full potential. So how are you thinking about building that relationship? Again, thinking about COVID, one of the things I've done as a team manager, if the supervisee is comfortable, is switch on the camera. You know, it just makes it more human and it makes it more personable. The non-verbal language becomes apparent as well. Again, how are you talking about emotions? What weighting are you giving to health and well-being? You know, so what does the student or staff think would make relational supervision? Again, I could talk about the R's for a long time, so I'm going to move on to reflective. Again, thinking about reflection, you might be talking about what models might you use? Are you going to bring in the Share model, the Mandela model, Gibbs, Kolb? And it's really thinking about how you want to give supervision, or how you want to conduct supervision through a reflective lens. Now, as I said, it's not just a supervisor's responsibility, and we spoke about power, I think in the last, Siobhan, you were speaking about power in the last webinar, in that power is not a dirty word in social work. I was just so pleased when you said that, because that's exactly how, you know, I feel and want to have that dialogue with many people, and that's why I say I feel home when I listen to you. So as a supervisee, what responsibility should you be taking for your supervision? How I mean, showing up is the first thing. You know, that would be a really good start. I've had people who don't want to show up to supervision when I've gone into a team as a new manager. So, you know, that's the start. But like, how committed are you in your own personal development? So taking responsibility to shape or reshape your supervision, because you do have the power. And if your supervisor is engaging in all those R's, then that really shouldn't be difficult. Again, being realistic. When I started as a practice educator, I remember my first student, it felt a bit like, if you think of transactional analysis, it felt like the parent-child situation of a parent and, you know, child. And there was a lot of learning and reflection for that. So around having some professional realism around, okay, this is not my parent and this is not my friend. So having those discussions about realistic expectations. And then reciprocal, you know, again, how are you showing up? How are you, how committed are you to shaping your supervision? Remember, supervision is not something that's done to you, it's done with you. So own it, contribute, give as much as you want, take from it abundantly, but also give abundantly. And one of the things I would say is show appreciation, validation. When you become a team manager or a practice educator, people forget to appreciate you. So it's quite nice when your student or a staff member actually give you some feedback, and also areas that are not working so well. So that's the kind of model about my R's. It really is about strengthening the supervisory relationship, but also about laying the foundation for the relationship. And just my next slide, just to finish off, Siobhan, again, the purpose of this model around all the kind of research around the growth mindset, growth and development, talks about thinking. When we think about our thinking, it's a really effective way of existing, really. People are quite effective when they think about their thinking. So it can really be used to prepare and lay the foundations for supervision. It's a way to reflect on your supervision and check in on how the R's, if you're meeting them. So you might, when you're reflecting in action, you might bring it to your 4th or 5th supervision and see how it's working for you. It's really versatile in that those R's can be replaced with any letter that you want. You co-produce it with your supervisor, so you don't have to use R's. I've used R's. You might find other words that are more appropriate and meaningful to you. It serves as the first building block for your supervisory relationship, and you can continue to add the blocks and build that house, which is your relationship. It's owned by both of you, so you can redress the power imbalance. You can use to reflect back on your final supervision. So I'm just finishing a role as a team manager, and I've done ending supervision with everyone. So looking back at how you know, what worked well about this, what didn't. And then really helpful for you if you're report writing, if you're in your ASYE, or if you're a student, or if you're the practice educator. So, you know, it's a model for mutual learning, really. Yeah. Thank you, Siobhan.
Thanks very much for that, Shabnam. With the Connect team are saying this is a whole webinar in itself, and we want to we may need to invite you back. I don't know. Just to say, in terms of being appreciated, there's lots of comments in the chat. I'm being sent some pictures of here that say, I want Shabnam to be my manager when I get qualified. You're very much appreciated. And I think, am I right, Shabnam? I know you're launching a YouTube channel yourself.
I am indeed.
And we will be sending people out information about that YouTube channel so that they'll be able to hear more from you. So,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your model with us. I love that. I you know, really enjoyed listening to it. And supervision and keeping reflection central to supervision is so important. So it's good to have this in the middle of these models of reflection. So thank you so much for sharing that. And, you know, one of the phrases that you just used there, laying the foundations, takes us on to our next presenter. And so, Amanda, are you there to present for us your model of reflection?
Yeah, I'm here, Siobhan.
Fabulous, thank you. Now, if people remember Amanda and Colin the cactus that she has with her, here is Amanda's model with Colin the cactus. So off you go, Amanda. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Amanda Ray. I'm a return to social work student, so I'll be hopefully getting my registration in the next few weeks. And I was inspired to try and construct a good model, having started watching all of these wonderful webinars, and I feel really privileged to be here. So thank you very much for inviting me along. So stage one of my building a house. So that all starts with the foundations, and preparation is the key to any piece of work. So my idea about constructing this house is a quite process driven, I suppose, in constructing a piece of work with a person. So the foundations is who are we seeing? Is it a child, an older person, the type of assessment that we're going to be doing, the types of information that we'll need to gather. Is there a toolkit that might be useful? BASWA have got lots of different toolkits for varying different styles, which are really useful. What approaches do we like to use? Are there any tools that we'll need to take with us? Direct work tools, do we need to take our paper and crayons working with a child, or do we need some flashcards if it's a child living with autism? And where's the appropriate place for it to take, you know, to happen? So is that the family home, or are we going to be on a ward if it's hospital social work? Is there somewhere else that maybe we could go to do a mental capacity act assessment? By the bedside might not be the right place. And so then the next stage is the ground floor. So this is sort of reflecting on what actually happened. How did it go? How did you feel about it? Did you use the approach that you'd planned for? What types of legislation did you use within it? Were the tools you took with you useful? You know, is there something different that you might do next time? And then the next stage is what else goes into that assessment. So the other people involved, so the family, the health professionals, the school, it might be a charity organisation, Home Start, or somebody that you include in it, and the different types of input that they have, and recommendations. Did you agree with them? Often, you know, when we're working with our health colleagues, they might be slightly more risk aversive than us, and it's our job to advocate on what the person wants, and that may not correlate with what the other professionals feel is best for them, but they are entitled to make that decision. So yeah, so that's the next bit. And then the last bit is the roof. So this is where you correlate all your bits of equipment and materials and whatever else you have to construct your house, and work out what recommendations you'll put forward, and what plans, etc., and what actions need to happen. Who might they involved, and how easy is that plan to put together? Have you got to be a bit more creative and include other areas, you know, within the voluntary sector to try and meet some of those needs? As we know, we are under-resourced. And then houses can expand, so we can have extensions. I've only got one on this picture, which the lovely Rosie has done for me. All the pictures done by Rosie, and she's done amazing. They're really good. So this is about, it could be about reviewing an assessment and how the plans went from reviewing, but it could also be to do with your learning about what you learned, what you might do different next time. Is there any training that might help you to expand better in your assessments, and what are your next steps? And like I said, it doesn't really need to end there. You can have you can pop a conservatory on, or you can put some things in the garden. If it's a very complex case and it's going to be something you're going to do lots of work with, you know, you'd have all sorts of extensions following the review, and doing pieces of work with a family that's perhaps you know, needing some long-term input. And then as time goes on, you can look back and see if your extensions, etc., need a bit of fixing up and a bit of DIY perhaps.
I think it's brilliant, Amanda. I absolutely love the model. There's a couple of things that really strike me about it. One is it's all about the lived environment, isn't it? And I think one of the things that some of the models that we're being taught all the time that often come from health, they don't take the environment into account, and that's the most important thing for us to do, and the house representing the environment is really important. But the other thing I love about it is it takes lots of builders to build a house. You can't do it on your own, and so that represents that, you know, as you've talked about, thinking about others, but also reflecting with others and being part of that team reflection as well, I think is really important. So absolutely love that model, think it's really good, and good luck with that return to social work as well. So and thank you very much for sharing your model with us, which I'm sure I'm gonna love reading the chat later when I can actually see the chat, because I'm sure people have loved that model. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, Amanda. And we're going to go now to Bethany, who is going to share with us a very contemporary model of reflection. And I'm intrigued as to where the flip chart was drawn up and drawn together. So I know Bethany did this with Esther, but Bethany, are you there now to talk us through your model?
Hi, I'm here. So I would just like to say thanks to the team and everyone for giving me this opportunity to speak. So yeah, I'm Beth, and I've been following the Student Connect team since the first webinar. So I feel a bit like overwhelmed that I'm here. It feels like a oh my god moment. But I am just a newly qualified social worker. So I am about to go on to my first post in a safeguarding team with children. Haven't started yet, but I made this model with Esther, who's actually in the chat tonight, but she couldn't make it to kind of be on screen. But we got together, and it was just as lockdown was being lifted. So it wasn't kind of, we thought after watching one of your webinars, Siobhan, that, you know what, we need to think about how uni's been for us in lockdown, how it's going to be when we're newly qualified social workers, and how different it's going to be. So we got together and we put this together, and it is what it says it is. It's our screen, it's our laptop screen. It's something we all see every day, whether we're students or social workers. We've titled it My Screen because I think it represents, whilst this is what me and Esther have put together, it could be anything that you want it to be. So what's on my screen might be completely different to what's on your screen. It's how you interpret the different apps and the different different things you have on your laptop. So you might not even have a laptop, you might have a tablet. So we kind of wanted to put together something that shows which impacts how social workers change and how our identity as practitioners or students changed, and also the connections within that. So many of us have felt different, like our supports changed, and how do we kind of reflect in a new way that's not surrounded by people. So I'm kind of going to just pick a few out. I won't use them all, but I'll pick a few. So I feel very much in the current situation that things are very blurred. We go from kind of our working life, our work laptops, maybe our home laptops or phones and screens, and we've got a little app there that says Sims, which is something I like to do in my spare time, which is very much the self-care thing. But you can also flip it on its head and say, well, Sims has a lot of families in that we kind of work with, and we kind of understand their lives. And I feel like for me that just represented that blurred boundaries of switching over the different laptops, and how does that feel when we're working with them now, and when we're about to go and meet a family we've never met before, how different does it feel that we might be seeing them on screen, and what new challenges are, what does that bring, but not only to us but to them. And I feel like we need to kind of think about that in greater detail, and this kind of model shows that where we need to remember that and what we need to do to kind of think about that. Here we've got the webcam, which is obviously another big part, and I feel quite anxious on webcam compared to real life. It's completely changed my way of working, and I don't know if it's the same for other people, and that probably is the same for families. So me and Esther thought about this, and we thought, obviously you're going to think about different superficial things, like how do I look, what does my room look like, will I be disturbed? And I was thinking about the 3 Ps, which we've talked about in some of the webinars before. So the professional, the personal, and the private. And very much the private is something we try and keep separate from work, and it's something that's just for us. And I feel like the boundaries here are very much being crossed from working from home, and it's all about that trauma, the secondary trauma that I think Siobhan talked about in one of her previous webinars, and kind of managing that and working out how we can separate that from our home life. And trauma breeds when it's not talked about, and I feel like if we have a model or something that incites us to talk about that, think about that, and think about why am I worried about what's going on behind me, and actually if I'm worried, what's the family thinking, and they're now seeing into your life as well. So it's, if we think about power, it's that bit of power that we've never kind of allowed anyone to have. It's that shared, I guess, more shared partnership working, because they can see your background, and we, like, when we go in, we're having to see that background. Often they don't have a choice. And with that is what is very important to me on here is the recycle bin, which is a reframing of thoughts and how does COVID-19 impact and why. And I feel like that question, regardless of whatever model we're using, is something now that we're asking every single day. So it's another aspect of, look, we're doing whatever we're doing, we're going out to do an assessment, we're going to do this, but what's COVID-19 bringing into this? What additional trauma is there? Not only for the person we're working with, but for us as well. And I feel like that's something that as practitioners we're having to reframe and think about the practitioner we want to be while working at home, and also still going out into the ever-changing world of social work. How are we doing for time, Siobhan?
If you want to choose another one to say, that'd be fine, Bethany, if you wanted to, just because I'm so fascinated. But
yeah, that's fine.
Give us one more aspect of the screen.
So I think for me, the other big point is the keyboard, which is how am I communicating and why does this change with the relationship? It's completely changed every aspect of why I came into social work, and also that aspect of how am I developing my, I guess you could bring virtue ethics into it when you think about what kind of social worker do I want to be, and how challenging now communicating with a family is in many ways for them and for us. There's many aspects we have to think about. If we think about poverty, if we think about everyone's access to different things, and I think COVID's especially shown that. And we need to make sure we're facilitating and thinking about that while we're working with them. And also our own issues. I mean, I've had Wi-Fi problems when I've been trying to connect to things, and it's something that we're all having to manage. And I just feel like for me and Esther, this model was it could bring in the other models as well, because obviously, as you can see, it's got the plan and review section, but we wanted to bring in that added like impact of COVID, that additional extended screen time that we're all having. And what really brought that home, I'd just like to finish and say, was when we watched one of the student spotlights, when Kat talked about how she was working from home when her son had fallen over, I think it was, and she couldn't do anything about it. And I think for us, it was that we need to think about how is that making us feel right now, and how are we going to support ourselves and talk about our new reality, but not just that, the people that we're working with, how do we bring that into it as well?
Yeah, I think this is just a brilliant model of reflection, Bethany, and I think, you know, you did it obviously with Esther, and hello to Esther who's in the chat, but I think it's really creative, but also that bringing in, it's so contemporary, isn't it? It's so, here is how COVID is impacting. And for you, you know, I mean, welcome to the profession, firstly, because you're coming into the profession, but you're going to be the first generation, I suppose, of social workers coming into your ASYE year in a global pandemic, and it is going to be different, and it is different for all of us. But I think the fact that we've all got so much screen time at the moment, and that you then took that and developed a model of reflection from that, I think is brilliant. And so thank you so much for sharing that with us. You did a fabulous presentation there, Bethany. Thank you. And so we're going to go to, I suppose, the final of the actual models that people have developed. We've still got a little bit more for you from some other guest speakers, but we're going to go to Ngozi now, who developed a brilliant model of reflection, which she sent in to us after one of the webinars. Are you there, Ngozi?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Ngozi Angucha. I'm a first-year MA student at Teesside University, Middlesbrough. I've been joining the webinar right from the start. I think I've only missed two, the very first one and last week for some reasons. But talking about my model, the idea came to me after one of the webinars on models of reflection, and then the one on analytics in social work. So I just kept thinking about it. And then I thought about, how do I make this come alive to me? How do I personalize reflection? Because every week I have to write my reflections. And then I remember the very first one, it was rubbish. And my practice educator said to me, you're going to improve after the third and fourth one. And that's how it's been. And that's because she introduced to me Siobhan McLean's the reflective cards, which I loved so much. And then Burton's model of what, so what, and now what. So the very day I developed this model, it was like 4 a.m. I woke up, I just got out of my bed and went to my laptop, and like I started writing down as the ideas were coming. So that's how I came to the boat ride. And so that's how I came to the boat ride model. Can we go to the next slide, please? Because I've talked about this first slide. Yes, the boat. If you notice on the very first slide, I kind of use the traffic light color code, if you look carefully. So the boat is red because you are on the traffic light and it stops. And so you are about to embark on a journey. For me, my learning journey, I see myself in a boat. And so if you're reflecting, you need to reflect before you embark on a journey. Before I became a social worker, you need to think, okay? And then what are your objectives and set your priorities? Am I gonna go or not? And then when you are on the boat, that is the O. You need to think what, why, and how as you go through the process or that journey. And then we come to A. After the journey, at the end of the process, what went well? What did not go well? What are the learning points for me? Because that's what I go through every week with my practice educator. And then the T of the boat is think. This is a time to think. Analyze your strengths, your potential and downsides. Take notes of what you think. The next slide, the ride. So the ride, if you notice, is the amber. And I find myself in the middle, just like where I am now, because I'm just a few weeks to ending my first placement, and it's been great. So read through in your notes. Every day you take your daily journal notes and your journal notes. So you take notes, research on issues encountered. You need to research. And that's the R. The I of your ride is to investigate further. And then the D, Siobhan McLean again, digging deep. You need to dig deep. Don't just investigate on the surface. You need to go deeper. And to really make it come alive, you draw a mind map and post it on your notice board. That's what I do, or where you can see it. And this will enable you to discover more areas to reflect on. And then the E is evaluate your options. You need to evaluate. I've taken this boat ride, and I'm nearly coming to the end of this boat ride. So when you evaluate, then you can add R. Because you've taken a boat ride, you are now a boat rider. And that's the way I'm gonna see myself when I finish my training in social work. But that's not just for social work students. It can be anything. It can be in any journey in your social work life. So that's where the result, and you add that at last, because you don't get the result until you get to the end. You are not a boat rider until you have taken a ride. And you see, I also use pictures on each of my slides. The pictures there also represent those color codes that I've used. So this final one here, green trees, positive results. Everything is okay, and that's because you have done a good reflection. A positive reflection brings out a good outcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ngozi. That was brilliant. You know, I wrote down at the start there when you said that the question you asked yourself was, how do I make this come alive to me? And that's a beautiful question. It's a beautifully reflective question that all of us need to ask ourselves. How do we make reflection come alive to me? But actually, Ngozi, what you've done, I think, there is you've made reflection come alive, not just to you, but to everybody listening. I think that was a really, really beautiful presentation. And, you know, I've read this and I've seen this and I've sort of put the slides into the slides here. I'd never noticed the traffic lights before until you said it. So it's just, we always notice something new. But that was beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing that, Ngozi. And so I think everybody in the audience tonight, I am sure, has really enjoyed listening to the models that have been developed by social workers, by students, by team managers. And I think we've had a great variety tonight of thinking about Ngozi's model of reflecting through her training, but then we've had some other models that are about specific incidents, or you could use different models for different things. And that's what we should be doing with models of reflection. Don't just stick to the same old model, asking yourself the same old question for everything that you do. Mix it up. As Ngozi's just said, how do I make this come alive to me? Is that idea of develop your own reflective model. And there was this model, the weather model, originally developed by a small group of students, oh gosh, 20 years ago, I think. And over the years, I've added to it, and so has the profession added to it. And it's a really good model of reflection. And we talked about this in webinar 2, so I'm not going to talk about it very much other than to say it's a model of reflection that I particularly enjoy using with students at the end of their placement. I also like to use this model when I'm working with newly qualified workers to explore their first year in practice. And it's a model that's particularly good for looking at a period of time. I was listening to a trailer for a BBC radio programme about social work yesterday, and I noticed they were using the weather model in a group supervision session. So the weather model has become incredibly popular. Lots of people are using the weather model. And so we're going to hand over now to our final guests for this evening, Andrea and Grace, who are going to share with you how they have used the weather model as a reflective prompt. So are you there, Andrea and Grace?
Yes, we're here, Siobhan. So my name's Andrea and I'm a second year student with the Open University. And I've recently finished my 70-day placement with Grace as my practice educator in the Children's Quality and Review team. It was quite a new experience for me and for the local authority because they hadn't done it before. So I kind of reflected on it after finishing the placement. So just to talk through it, looking at my very foggy, feeling quite engulfed in fog, not knowing much about children's social care because I'm more from adults, and sort of working through fog at the beginning of the placement, learning new things, feeling like the fog was lifting, but then through service delivery, going back into the fog. So when I went to the multi-agency children's hub with Grace, again, it was back to finding new, meeting new teams, new policies and procedures, different client groups. So I felt like I've kind of moved through the fog, jumping back into pockets of it and then learning new, coming back out, but it's still not clear, and I don't think it ever will be because there's always learning to be had. The wind I looked at was kind of creating movement, so transitions. For me, I'm from an adult team, so going into a children's placement was a big transition for me, and then going back to the team after my placement, moving through comfort zones continuously, working with different teams because I was able to work with different teams like the multi-agency children's hub, child protection, so there was a lot of transition in teamworks. And I think movement by my determination and progression really through placement. Moving on to showers, the big raindrop. I think people see rain as negative. at times. I felt like I was showered with positive raindrops in being, you know, showered with help and support, showered with patience, knowledge, shared experience and encouragement around me. I was really lucky on placement. Showered with opportunities to learn and meeting new people. So I think, you know, sort of reviewing from the practice learning agreement through to the midpoint review, towards the end, I was very lucky in being showered with all that opportunity. And the snowflake is representing me seeing things differently. I remember sort of in the video I watched, Siobhan, that you did on YouTube, was about seeing things differently and how when it snows things look entirely different. And I think just through supervision and my experience and having that unique experience, you know, I have been able to see things differently.
And I'm just going to come in. I'm Grace Miller. I'm a social worker and I've been in practice for 22 years. So it's quite a humbling experience tonight to hear such fantastic models. I'm so pleased, and I just want to kind of follow on from what Andrea said, in that if anyone's ever been to Redcar, they will know how quickly the weather can change. And for Andrea, this was her experience in placement. We had the first lightning strike, which was by way of a cyber attack. So there was no access to systems, there was no database, there was no documents and procedures. We were lucky, Andrea has a huge stationery collection. So suddenly Andrea and her huge resource of stationery were massively used, and back to pen and paper even in 2020. And then the lightning struck again within 2 weeks of Andrea coming with COVID-19. So we were rumbling along with the thunder and we could have took shelter, but not Andrea. Andrea's placement was key to her moving on, so we chose to ride the storm, embraced the rapid climate change, which was fresh opportunities not just for Andrea but for me as well. And it was both technically and in terms of inquiry skills, we were suddenly learning very quickly. And I would say we jumped in many puddles, not sure how deep the challenge would be, but both thriving on the fear of the storm. Obviously with COVID-19 it was unprecedented, and then these opportunities were ensuring that Andrea was able to develop her practice and continually reflect on her actions whilst coming through the storm, which was basically her placement.
And that leads us to the sunshine and the rainbow. And I think the sunshine represents, like I've put there, Grace, overseeing my placement and being a brilliant practice educator, sounding quite gushy. And the rays of sun for the other team members, that's all the sunshine and their initials and the connections, because although it was a team that I'd sort of heard of and heard names, they were so supportive. It was brilliant. And the rainbow being my journey, showing diversity with people that I worked with, different colours. But I think, you know, I always feel lucky when I see a rainbow. It doesn't happen very often, and that's how I feel about my placement. And the pass at the end of the rainbow was the end result, so that was really good.
The pot of gold at the end of your rainbow, was it, Andrea?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, when you posted that on Twitter, I just thought, oh, it was so lovely to see. And I think one of the great things about the weather model is the way in which people see the weather differently. So, you know, you see the wind as movement, and you know, people see things differently. As you said, some people see the rain as negative, whereas you saw the rain as positive. But I wrote down something when you were both talking. I think it was when Grace was talking about how the weather changes and there was lots of thunder and lightning and all kinds of things in your placement. And I was thinking it summarises what I think all of us are doing at working through COVID at the moment. And it's you know, that old phrase, I use it a lot in my work, but life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning how to dance in the rain. And it seems to me, Andrea, that during that placement, you really worked out how to dance in the rain.
I've got that decal on my wall at home.
Yeah, marvellous. See, that works through. So thank you so much, both Grace and Andrea, for coming and sharing with us the that way that you've used that self-developed model of reflection to evaluate and think about your placement. So thank you very much. for that. So tonight we've had 10 models showcased. You know, we started off with Share and the Big Six, and we've ended with the weather model, which was developed, you know, as I say, some time ago now. But then those other models there, they might be references that you are not familiar with. Wilcock et al., England et al., Robins, Ahmed, Ray, Pearson and Robertson, Anucha. You may not be familiar with those names. You've not referenced those in assignments, but they are the models that I think we should be celebrating as social workers. We need to learn more from social work practitioners. We need to have models which are developed. Some of the passion that we've heard tonight in the presentations has been fabulous. And as social workers, I think we deserve models that work for us and that support us in our work with children, families and adults that we work with and alongside. We need models that are fit for purpose, models that work effectively, and not just models that are coming and given to us from somewhere else, from someone who just says, here, this is how to do it. Because we are the people that do in social work, and we are the people that know the models that can work for social work. I think we've heard some fabulous models tonight. I think it has been great to be able to celebrate our 10th webinar by hearing about 10 models of reflection, and the references are all there. I know that you know, Ngozi was saying, oh, it's unusual to see yourself in a reference, you know, for all of you are referenced in tonight's webinar. And so I would like to say a particular thank you to everybody who has come and presented tonight, all our guest speakers. But I also want to say a particular thank you to the Social Work Connect team, the Student Connect team, because we have done 10 webinars, and I am amazed still by how you are working through all of this and doing brilliant jobs. I know Becky's on holiday, but everybody else is here tonight. So thank you so much for everything that you have done, both to our guests and to our regular Connect team. For those of you who like to come every week, then next week we have a really special guest, Annie, who is the founder of Surviving Safeguarding. We're going to be talking about assessment in social work. We'll start off with a little bit of theory, but it's going to be mostly practice. And Annie will be talking about what it feels like to be a parent who is being assessed through the child protection system. And then we're going to be, the following Wednesday, we're going to be looking at the theory base of shame, which I think is too often ignored in social work. So thank you very much for everybody tonight. I'm hoping that all the guest speakers are visible on camera now and can maybe wave and say thank you. So thank you very much to everybody for joining, and thank you to everybody for attending.